For those of you that don't know me, my name is Natasha Daniels, and I'm a child therapist and the creator of this amazing group. And I specialize in anxiety and OCD. And once a month, I come on here and do a class so that I can give you some help and some guidance and some support. So welcome, Cindy. We are just waiting for people to get on. For some reason, Facebook feeds have been very slow lately. I don't know if you've noticed that. So even when I do my weekly lives in my community, like my AT parenting community, people will email me and they'll say that it took a little while to get on. So as we're waiting, I'll just talk a little bit about what's going on in the AT parenting community. And we are going to be talking all about how to handle difficult behavior today. I have probably like 15 questions that people had asked on the thread. So I'm hoping to get to them. However, if you are here live, welcome Pam, thanks for joining. If you're here live, feel free to write in your questions, and that way we're having a dialogue, and I like that. I will record this. It's being recorded because it's on Facebook, but I will upload it to YouTube as well, so you can watch the replay if you're not able to make the whole thing, because I am hoping to stay on for an hour, and so I can answer all these questions. And if you guys have questions as we go, I'm going to veer off and I'm going to get off topic from the person who asked the question so that I can bring you some value. So welcome, Annette. Thanks for joining us. So again, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Natasha Daniels, and I am the creator of this group, this amazing group that's growing so big. And I am a child therapist. I'm also the creator of atparentingsurvival.com. And I created this group to offer parents more support for anxiety and OCD. So let's get into the questions today, and people can join as they come. So I got a couple that were very similar, and if you have your own questions, feel free to pop in. The first thing I want to say, though, before I get into the questions, is we have to change our perception about behavior. And that's really where I want to start, is the perception. Because when you're raising a child with anxiety or OCD, you could see the behavior as something separate. And so you can say, you know, gosh, we have to deal with this anxiety or this OCD. And then on top of all that, she's talking back, or she's having meltdowns, or she's refusing to do things, and she's so difficult. And so we see that almost as something separate. And a lot of times we might, one, doubt our parenting. And one of you, I'm trying to think who said this, Julie, had said that she felt like she was failing as a mom because her child was having such difficult behavior. And so I think it's important to realize that your child, if they have anxiety or OCD, is much, much more likely to have some difficult behavior. And that behavior will look different for each person. It might look like talking back and oppositional, and it could be yelling and screaming and being defiant and saying things that are mean. Or it could be shutting down, not talking, hiding, refusing to do things, but in a very shut down sort of way. And so our kids will all do things in a different sort of way, but it's all really difficult behavior. And before I get into the questions, I want to highlight two things. One, that we have to change our perception on the behavior. And so whatever I tell you today is not going to be like, oh, okay, well, if I was just doing that, then all this behavior is going to go away. No. Unfortunately, behavior is a side dish to anxiety and OCD, and it's going to be there, but it's what we do with that. And so you can have the most amazing parenting approach in the world. You could be like, Mary Poppins. Was she great? I don't know. and your child is still going to have nasty behavior. My kids, they're in the other room, so I have to talk quietly, have some nasty behavior sometimes. And it's not because I'm not doing something right. It's just because when you live with anxiety and OCD, you live like this. And so it's like, going out in public is causing me stress. And then, oh my gosh, that somebody touched something. And then what if I get sick? And then, oh my gosh, how long are we going to be out? And then by the time you tell me to go do something, I'm here and I'm going to be like, it's not going to take much. They're living like their adrenaline and their cortisol is pumping all the time. And so they're living in a very aroused state all the time. And so their wiggle room to explode is very small. They don't have a lot of patience. So that is happening with your kids. So I want you to recognize that, because there's not much we can do about that. But then the second part and that we're going to really dive into today, is what do you do with that? And so there are learning opportunities in behavior. And I know that sounds like, exhausting. But when we actually look beyond the behavior and we look at what's driving the behavior, we look at the triggers and the core fears, honestly, 90 to 95% of the behavior that most of us are seeing is driven by the anxiety and OCD. And maybe 5 to 10% is just typical behavior. Some of our kids wouldn't have really big behaviors if they didn't have anxiety and OCD. Kids are kids, right? But when you live under this stress, everything's a big deal. So we're going to talk about how you tap into those learning opportunities, because when a child is having a hard time, sometimes, not always, but sometimes that is where the learning is. Like, that's really the meat and potatoes. It's not in my office when I'm, doing therapy with a kid. It's in the moment when they're triggered and they have to use all the skills they've been taught. And so we don't always have the patience to deal with that, but I want to touch a little bit on that today. So hopefully that helps. Annette said the worry cloud advice has helped a little. That's good. Welcome, Teresa. Personifying things can be very helpful, because then it's like the worry cloud is making you do this, or, and it's not to blame the worry cloud, but to say, I'm sorry, the worry cloud doesn't want to go out to eat, and the worry cloud doesn't want to go swimming. But, if we listen to the worry cloud, then the worry cloud grows bigger. So it helps with opposition, because then we can address it. We can address it separate from our kids. And so I do like that additional approach. Okay, I'm going to get into the questions, but feel free to interrupt me. And feel free to leave comments. He sends it to China. I love that. See, you can get goofy and funny with it. It's awesome. Okay, so Brawny said, how do I teach my child that her OCD is a separate issue to when she shows rude and disrespectful behavior? And Sarah said, how do I know when my son's hideous and unreasonable behavior is being driven by OCD or is just because of plain rudeness and rebellion? And so I put those questions together, and I bet a lot of you guys have that, because that's a common question. What is anxiety and OCD, and what is just ugly behavior? Well, for starters, welcome Tamara, thanks for joining us. For starters, well, let me just go back. Even if your child has not been triggered in that moment, so let's say you say, go put your shoes away, and your child just goes ballistic, and you're like, what's the deal? And it has nothing to do, like they don't have contamination issues, or there's nothing that is triggering them. They're still living in this hyper aroused state. And not to give them an excuse, but for us to know that our kids are going to have big reactions sometimes in general, because they're living in this arousal state where they're stressed all the time. There's internal stress going on that we're not aware of. So there is that. It doesn't mean that we don't approach it and handle it in a positive way where we don't allow that to happen, and we can get into that. But even if you can't directly relate it to anxiety or OCD, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's not because they're not living under that stress. Now, the other thing I would say is you want to know your child's triggers. And so knowing their triggers will know, if I say, go pick up your shoes, and I know that they do have contamination issues and they don't like to touch the inside of their shoes or the outside of their shoes, and they're trying to pick up their shoes and they don't know how to do it, well, that's obviously an OCD issue and not a behavior issue, right? They're being triggered. So that you want to be able to really know your child's themes and anxiety themes and OCD themes. Okay, so Michelle said, how do you do without the blue? All right, I can't read what she wrote because I cut and pasted it. She said, I don't want to give into OCD demands, but they're so exhausting living through these huge emotional explosions. And a lot of people had very varying questions that were not, some of them were just pure OCD questions and some of them weren't. And so in that case, honestly, you want to start to pull back your accommodations, and your child will have meltdowns when you pull back your accommodations. We're not going to get into that today. This is just about kind of typical behavior that is getting triggered by the anxiety or OCD, because I don't want to dive too deep into OCD treatment or anxiety treatment today, because that's not the purpose. I've done other live classes on that, and I pin them all to this page. And so if you've never seen all the pinned Facebook Live classes that I've done for you, you can always go to the top and watch them all, because there's a lot of them now. And I also replay them on my YouTube channel. And so you can go check those out as well. So welcome, Kara and Amber. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. So yeah, you don't want to give into those accommodations. And you want, in my opinion, you want to ride through the meltdown, even if parents will say, oh my gosh, it is hellacious. It is so bad. You want to maybe make a list of the accommodations and start slowly pulling back and deal with the meltdowns and calmly just be like, I'm sorry, but I don't listen to Mr. Bossy, or I'm sorry, I don't do what your dictator wants. Because the more you do, because you're avoiding the meltdown, the more meltdowns your child will have. It's very counterintuitive, but the OCD just realizes, hey, she'll do what I want. I can kind of like hijack this house and it's my house. We don't want to send that message. So Amber said she's watching in Alabama. Well, welcome. I hope it's calm in Alabama. I know there's been a lot of storms everywhere. And welcome, Megan. Thanks for joining us too. Julie said, related to Michelle's question, she asked herself, oh, I already talked about that she was failing as a mom. So I think it's really important for us to not waste time beating ourselves up about our parenting. And I don't mean to be callous in that, but we really are wasting time when we focus on the why. Like, why am I failing my kids? What am I doing wrong? Why is my friend not having this problem, but I am? It's because your child has anxiety or OCD. And so they're not always going to be rainbows and butterflies, because have you ever been really sick and you're like grumpy and you're nasty? I know I have. I don't do pregnancy well, and I don't know how I had 3 babies, because I throw up through my entire pregnancy every single time. And I'm a beast. Like for 9 months, 9.5 months sometimes, I'm nasty. I'm not fun to be around. And that's because I'm living under constant stress. It's very similar. And so they're not always going to be wonderful, and that is not your fault. So don't focus on that. You want to focus on the patterns, what's triggering them, what's upsetting them. So I'm going to keep going on because I have a lot of questions. But if you have questions as I'm going, or your own question, feel free to pop on and leave a comment. I tend to talk a lot. So then Tracy asked, she asked about always playing the victim. Like her child always plays the victim and is always also verbally aggressive. So that's another behavior. Now we were talking about difficult behaviors like, meltdowns and talking back. And she does talk about talking back, but also your child being a victim. And I am very blunt with my kids. It depends on your child's style. I do have a very sensitive child. My Miss 7 is super sensitive, but she does play the victim a lot. In fact, she was becoming such a victim that she was starting to enjoy it. And she would cry a lot at school. And then she had a very, thank goodness, loving, supportive teacher, but she was very coddled, probably more so than she needed to be. And so she's developed this behavior of just crying. And once school was out, I talked to her about being a victim. And I say, you can be a victim. And so you want to just, depending on your kid, have direct conversation about that. She's 7. And I just said, you're not a victim. You are a powerful, strong girl. You are so feisty. You have such a beautiful, strong personality in everything else. Don't let your worry cloud, take away your sunshine. Don't let your worry cloud squash you and make you a victim, because you can fight back and you can win and you can shine through all that. So I think empowering them in that way is a good thing to talk about. It doesn't mean that they're going to change right away, because I think sometimes we think we're going to say these beautiful words. I know I think this. I'm like, that was a beautiful conversation, and it has no impact. And I'm like, seriously? That was a beautiful 45-minute conversation on my part. It's okay. We're planting seeds. And so don't gauge your success or your failure based on the moment. And that goes for all behavior. If you're doing something in the moment, let's say your child talks back. Let's take Tracy's example of being verbally aggressive. And so a lot of our kids, and my kids included, will say nasty things. They'll say things like, I hate you. Actually, I'll give you a real life example that just happened. We were at the pool, and my Miss 7 gets really nervous about going out. Her anxiety is really high right now. And she did fine. She went swimming and she had a great time. And then when we were leaving, she sat down to have a snack, and I didn't bring her chips. I brought her oranges, and she got very upset. Now I know she was upset because she was starting to feel sick because she has emetophobia. And so she started to feel like her stomach was hurting. For some reason, she thinks chips are going to make it better. Like nothing makes sense in this world. And she was getting hostile with me, and she was saying stuff like, I can't believe you forgot the chips. This is the worst day ever. And some kids, and my kids on a higher state can get very verbally aggressive. Instead of getting lost in that, squirrel-like behavior where I'm going to get lost in what she's saying and say, don't talk to me that way, and you're being disrespectful, and I just took you to the pool, and why can't you appreciate that? No, all I'll say is, I know you're feeling nervous right now. I'm going to address the behavior behind it. I know that you're feeling anxious. I know that you're feeling upset because your stomach hurts. I'm not going to process too much, because when your kids are spiraling, less is more. But I'm not going to address the behavior in that moment, because it's not about the behavior. It's about the anxiety. And so when we take that was like a little life lesson. That was a moment for me to, one, help her connect the dots, the mind-body dots of, I'm not well right now. I'm really anxious. And get her to know that I get it, and to help her reframe her thinking. So Teresa said, hi, Natasha, you are such a blessing to my family. We have learned so much from you. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to go on to Chrissy said, what to do when rewards and challenges don't work because your child isn't motivated for them. So how many of you, and Rebecca, I'm going to get to your question right after this one. So how many of you have kids who just aren't motivated to work on their anxiety or OCD? And I think I did a class on that last month or the month before. I have like no memory, but I do have a lot of resources on motivation. So you can definitely look at that. But I always say that it's finding the sweet spot. So one, kids aren't motivated if they're not educated. So I start with education. What is anxiety or what is OCD, why you need to work on it, what it can look like when you're older, how it's going to like swallow you whole. That sounds horrible. But I want kids to realize like this isn't going away. This is not a kid thing. This is a human thing. And this looks really bad in your 20s, and this looks really scary in your 30s. So I do a lot of tough love and trying to motivate kids. And then if you've heard me talk at all, I'm very big into reinforcers. It's a huge part of my therapy. I buy kids gifts on Amazon, and I put them in a cabinet in my therapy office, and I donate the gifts to the kids when they earn tickets for it. And honestly, that completely moves the needle. When I do that, kids light up, they're excited about therapy, and they start doing exposures. Now, the trick is finding the sweet spot and what will motivate them. So one, finding the motivation, and two, if a child is refusing to do any challenges or exposures, you're probably going too high. And so if I had a person, I'm trying to think, if I had a person who was afraid of touching this for some reason, I would find some way to get them over there, little baby step. Maybe I'd say, well, just touch the table. So whatever you have that your child is trying to work through, find the smallest little baby step just to get them moving. It doesn't matter if it's not a big deal. Let's say your child's afraid to go to the bathroom by themselves, and you stand right by the door, but you're not in the bathroom. That's a baby step. And then you celebrate that. That's awesome. Look at you. You're fighting your anxiety. You're so powerful. So much of this is about the message, about us empowering them, and not about making progress in the beginning. It's just about actually getting traction. Okay, so Rebecca said, my son is labeled as a class clown, and he says, Mom, so I have to be Sully everywhere. I know some of it is anxiety, but it's hard to separate, especially since his teachers think he does it on purpose. I think his silly, crazy style is a coping mechanism to, I don't know why, but that's all it says. I think you got cut off. I see a lot of kids using coping mechanisms like being a clown or being disruptive, because it's a smoke screen for all the other behavior. And I'm trying to think if you said how old he is. You didn't. So depending on his age, sometimes I'm really frank with kids, and I'll say stuff like, I know that it's easier to be a class clown than to deal with your discomfort. Or I know that you sometimes feel uncomfortable socially, and I don't know about your child, Rebecca, but it's easier to do that. Or I've had a couple of kids in my practice recently who misbehave at school. And I'll say, I know it's easier for you to get in trouble than for you to feel uncomfortable. And so calling out the behavior and helping them make the connections is a good first step. A lot of times kids will argue back and be like, that's not the case, but you're planting seeds and you're kind of reframing the thinking. So Angie said her daughter says her compulsion to swallow air is a reflex, and it's medically hurting her, and she doesn't know how to work on this one. Now that is not really difficult behavior, so I'm not going to go into that one too much, Angie, but a lot of times when I have kids, well, I guess I'm going to go into it for a second. A lot of kids who have sensory motor OCD or kind of Tourette OCD, where they have to do something over and over, sometimes I'll challenge them and I'll see how far they can go without doing it. And so it's getting her to pay attention. And sometimes if it's about almost like a tick-like OCD behavior where she has to breathe in, you can come up with an alternative behavior right before she does it. But I'm not going to go into that just because that's not what this class today is about, but I did want to touch on that. So like I have kids who, will do blinking and we'll say, can you go, like how long can you go without doing your compulsion? And then they keep their score and they keep their high record and their high score, and then I reward them for like their high score. So that's an approach I take in therapy. Melissa said, how to handle vindictive behavior. How many of you are dealing with vindictive behavior? I'm going to take a sip. That's one I deal with a lot at my house. I have one child who's very vindictive. And a lot of that has to do with pointing out who they want to be. And so a lot of these behaviors, like these deep-rooted behaviors, like being vindictive, that's not about self-regulation. That's not about losing control. That is about needing an eye for an eye, or like you did this to me and so I have to make it fair and so I have to do it back. So sometimes I see this in kids who have, ironically, some symmetry OCD. So you did this to me, I need to make it even. And I know that seems really weird, but I've seen that a lot. Or people who have moral OCD and it's like it's unjust. Or just people who have anxiety and things have to be fair and right. And it's not okay that you did that to me. And so I have to do that back to you. So my son is like that. And we'll have lots of conversations at my house and I'm planting seeds, but I philosophically talk about, and he's 9. I talk about how I say, you, and my daughter who's 15 is actually a little bit like this too. And I'll say, you are who you are. So who are you? Let's talk about integrity. Let's talk about your values, right? And I try to talk to my kids on a mature level, even if they're not getting everything I'm saying, because I feel like it's getting absorbed on some level, right? And I'll say, so if someone does something bad to you, let's say they call you a name. If you're a kind person and you don't normally call people names, why would you let that person drag you down and be different than who you are? You want to stay firm in who you are. So my personality is not to call people names. My personality is not to be mean. I don't hit people. I don't, punish people or be vindictive. And so when you do something to me, I'm not going to let you take the power from me and drag me down. And you do that when I act the same way that you're acting to me back to you. So that's a very mature concept and very hard to solidify for a while. And Pam said, yes, so many perceived injustices. And I think a lot of our kids have this, a lot of behavior comes from perceived injustice, right? Like, oh my gosh, that's not fair. She had that and I need that. And we have a saying in my house, and maybe it seems like not very positive parenting oriented, but I always say, life is not equal and life is not fair. And I say, look around you. Do you think everybody drives the same car? Does everybody have the same kind of house? Is everybody going on the same type of vacations? No. And sometimes it's not fair. You might have somebody who works really, really hard, but they can barely get food on the table. And you have another person who doesn't work that hard at all. And they live in a mansion. I go, life is not equal and life is not always fair. At school, they make it seem like it is, by really giving everybody the exact same, but that's not how it is. And it's not for me to say whether that's fair or not, but that's just reality, right? So having that conversation, especially for those kids that get stuck, can be really helpful. So Carrie said, can anxiety and OCD look like a lack of social skills? Yes. to answer you, yes. My child's teacher and now therapist says she doesn't have social skills at school where she's been bullied and that she needs further evaluation for autism, but I see amazing social skills from her outside of school. Yeah, and that's got to be frustrating for you if you're not seeing that, but the school and the therapist is seeing that. So I would ask them what they're seeing. Anxiety can often look like autism, and so I think sometimes they get smushed together. So sometimes there is an autistic diagnosis and it's being labeled as anxiety, and sometimes it's anxiety and it's looking like autism, because kids who are having Social anxiety can look very autistic. They can look like they're on the spectrum. When kids are anxious, that sometimes they're flapping or they do stereotypical type of behavior. And so I would ask them what they're seeing that's making them think that she's on the spectrum, and then look at those things, because maybe they're seeing things that you're not seeing. Can she read social cues? Is she socially appropriate? I would find out what they're seeing that's making them think that. So Todd said, we're emotionally struggling because we have done so many different treatments and therapists. Even the therapist is saying that we are doing what we're supposed to, but our 9-year-old with SPD2 isn't fulfilling her side. How do we encourage her to make that self-motivation to regulate? It's frustrating when our kids will not be motivated. Let me see. So I think some of it is finding out what will motivate her. And although this does not sit well with a lot of people, sometimes they don't care if we say these are the ramifications, especially a 9-year-old. If you're like, if you don't, and I don't know what your problem is actually. Oh, self-motivation to regulate. So it's a regulation issue. Hold on a second, because we're getting a lot of questions here and I'm getting distracted. Yeah, because I was trying to figure out what the issue is that you're trying to deal with, Todd. So if she doesn't want to self-regulate, it feels good to explode. It feels good to melt down. Like it's an endorphin release, to do something with all these chemicals that are pumping in you. And so sometimes I think external motivations can help if a child has some skills that they can work on. So one, getting them to own it. Sometimes we're trying too hard and our child's not. And so sometimes with my kids, I'll pull back and I'll just be like, you can do that if you want to. You're not going to go out with us and do this, but you can act that way. That's up to you. I can't control your feelings. What do you want to do with that? And so maybe when she's calm, and I'm sure lots of therapists have already told you this because you've already had so many, but it's putting the ownership on her. And I think external motivations really help initially. So just to get it going, sometimes tapping into gamifying it, like if you can remain calm and use your skills, you can earn blah, blah, blah. And then whenever you see even the smallest little bit of something, like she took a deep breath and she walked away from her brother and she never does that. You're on that, depending on your child's level of tolerance for praise, you're on that and you're like, wow, I saw what just happened. I saw that you walked away and, normally you'd probably hit him. So that's a good use of the skills that you picked out that you wanted to use. So being a little subtle, so it's not about you, because if they think it's about us, like if they think that we care more than they do, they're not going to be motivated. We have to get them to be motivated for themselves. So Annette said, we're going through that right now, checking for autism. Just going back to our last conversation about autism. Rebecca said, sorry, unfinished sentence. We have tornadoes here. Oh gosh, well, I hope you're safe. There's tornadoes everywhere. He's 8. Yeah, that's scary. Well, Rebecca, I hope that you're safe. I don't know what is going on with this country right now and all the tornadoes. So scary. Okay, so let me go to the next question. Leanne said, what do you do if you don't have time to help them through their anxiety or work through the real issue when you're in a hurry? Okay, and then Lena, we'll get to your question right after this. So, and we got plenty of time because I'm going to be here until 3. And if you can't stay and catch the whole thing, that's okay. There'll be a recording and you can catch the rest later. So, yeah, sometimes you're not going to have time to really address the root problem. So if you're like trying to go to school and your child is having a meltdown and it's because they're anxious about going to school and they have a fear of throwing up or they have a fear of separating from you and that's the struggle, you want to talk about these things prior to that. So I'll give you an example. We'll use my Miss 7 again. She had a hard time going to school. And so we wouldn't talk about that when she was going to school in the morning because at that point, it's just containment. I mean, she's not in the space to learn new skills or to hear me talk at all. But the night before, I'll say, okay, in the morning, you're going to wake up and your stomach is going to hurt. That's going to happen, right? Because I don't need a crystal ball to figure out that that's going to happen. She's like, yeah, that's going to happen. And we're not having this conversation at bedtime. We're having it maybe after school. And then we come up with a plan. And when you come up with a plan, what can you do? What can help, reset your brain? What green thoughts can you tell yourself? What activity can you do so that you are changing the channel in your brain? And we come up with these plans. And then in the morning, all I have to do is say, remember your plan. Now, of course, she's going to yell back and it's not going to go smoothly. But at least I don't have to go through that in the moment when I'm trying to get ready for work or trying to get the other kids ready. I can just say, let's talk about your plan. Or remember, I think you said, and I always tried to play like, I'm trying to think of that detective's name who's like fumbly, Columbo. You know Columbo? I don't know if any of you are old enough to know Columbo, but like he acts like he doesn't know what he's doing, but he does. Now, I do that a lot with my kids where I'll be like, I don't know. Didn't you have a plan yesterday? What was your plan? You were going to do something. Did it involve going into my office? I don't remember. Because you want them to own it. So instead of me telling, like, remember, yesterday we talked and we had a plan, and the we, it's not about we, right? So we had a plan? No, it's about her. So I play more like the Columbo where I'm like, didn't you have a plan? What was your plan? I thought you were going to do something. And then they own it. And then she's like, I was going to go in the office. And then she might fight back and say, but I don't want to go. That's okay. Then I'll say, well, I don't know. What do you want to do? Like I play I play a back seat because I don't want to be in the driver's seat. Okay. So Lena said, how do you handle siblings, both with anxiety, that seem to feed off each other when it comes to difficult behavior, ages 5 and 10? It's like my house, Lena. I totally get that. Ages 7 and 9 and 15, but she's normally in her room hibernating. That is hard. So one thing that I suggest, and I don't know how mature your 5-year-old is, but I will take my kids separately. I'll take them out and I will start to talk to them about the other one's themes. And so I'll say, look, your brother, he gets really upset with blah, 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 blah. And so when you do this, he's not trying to be difficult, but that's one of his anxiety themes. And then I'll take him aside and I'll say, look, your sister, she's got a pee thing, you know? And so when you do this, that's why she reacts that way. So it's planting seeds, but definitely letting them in and letting them know about the other siblings' anxiety themes can really help. And then also like praising and highlighting one of the child's efforts to work through their anxiety is a learning lesson for the other one. In my family, we're constantly talking about good job fighting your fears, or hey, I will say I was nervous about blah, 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 and this is what I did. And so we're modeling, one, healthy communication, that it's okay to talk about, nothing to be embarrassed about. 2, we all have issues, and everyone in my family knows everyone else's themes because we're working together. Not in a beautiful sort of way, because it's always pretty ugly, but we all are working in a messy sort of way together. So I would start with that. Michelle said, yes, thank you, makes sense. I'm not sure what part. Okay, so let me continue. Got to Leanne. Emma said, how to cope with demands, constant questioning for something that's been discussed that she can't have. I discuss and then ignore repetitive questions, but it can last for days. Dee Dee says she needs to just get it out of her head. Okay, the last comment that you made, and I don't know if Emma's on here still. I think I saw her in the beginning. When your kid says they just need to get it out of their head, that's a red flag to me. And I don't know if your daughter has OCD, but when they need to do things over and over repetitively to get it out of their head, now we're not dealing with behavior, we're dealing with a compulsion. And so I would question whether that is a compulsive behavior or if it is just anxiety. If it's a compulsive behavior where they have to ask you something over and over again and they really don't even care what you say, or you have to respond in a very specific way, don't label that difficult behavior. Label that a compulsion and deal with it in an OCD sort of way, that you're dealing with a compulsion, because those are very different. I'll also give you another example with my son. He's got a little bit of moral OCD. And so when I tell him not to do something, he has to do it. And that is very annoying. And that can look like very oppositional, difficult behavior. And it's hard because I do have to alter my parenting style for that. But like we were swimming and there's a divider and there's a swim lane where kids go back, not kids, adults do laps and the rest of the kids can swim in the other area. And because of my social anxiety, probably, I'm like, don't go near there. Don't go near the lap lane, right? You just stay over here. And even though the pool was pretty empty and there was nobody in the lap lane, I was just like, let's just make it a general rule that you don't go in the lap lane. Well, he had to. And so he would just kept going in and then he'd go out and then he'd go in and he'd go out. And the firmer I got, the more he did it, because with him, and I know this, but sometimes we get trapped. It's like quicksand, we get trapped. The more I draw a firm line in the sand, the more he has to see what will happen if he does it. And so we went back and forth for a little while until I just realized that I'm in this loop and I know that I know better. And finally, I just, said, let it go. And I didn't make it as big of a deal. And then he moved on. So some of our kids will have a hard time with drawing a line in the sand, which is really bizarre. Okay, so I have one more question. And then if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we can end. Sean said, dealing with a fascinating dichotomy of a child with moral OCD, the morals on how to behave seem to go out the window in the middle of an OCD loop, where the child blames you, says you're mean, aren't doing anything to help, don't understand what he's going through, and escalate into yelling and screaming. Yeah, and I think anxiety and OCD do not make rational sense. So I can have moral OCD and be so concerned with being a good person and upsetting people. And yet when I'm in the middle of an OCD storm, it all goes out the window. Or I could be really concerned with germs and wash my hands a zillion times a day, but food drops on the floor and maybe my OCD doesn't care about that and I can eat the food. Like, there's no rational sense to anxiety and OCD, not always. And when we try to make sense of it, we kind of lost it to begin with because we're trying to make sense of something that's often nonsensical. So moral OCD will only attack what it's concerned with and it will forget the rest. And so, kids will act out when they're upset and they'll say really mean things. And I really feel like we can get lost and stuck on that surface behavior and forget that really the core issue is the thing underneath. And so it would be talking to the OCD directly and just say, I know you're upset because your OCD wants me to do this compulsion. Your OCD wants me to give you reassurance, and I'm not going to high five your OCD. And so I get that you're upset. You're upset because your OCD is really bothering you right now. And because I love you, I'm not going to listen to your OCD. And I know that's hard for you. I'm going to walk away because I don't really like what's happening here. So, who talks like that? But that would be ideal. That would be what you want to aim for. So if you have other questions, I actually kind of got through those rather quickly. If you have other questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will answer them. Otherwise, I'll start to wrap up. I do have an online on-demand class coming out on Monday, June 3rd, called Handling Difficult Behavior. So I have had emails and requests and messages from people for the last 2 years to do a course on just behavior with kids with anxiety and OCD. And I haven't because I have put out some really big classes on anxiety and OCD, and I just haven't had time to actually do a big class on behavior. But I started to develop one and I was going to make it kind of small and it grew. So if you are interested in the class, I did leave a link in the at the top. You can go to bit.ly/atbehavior and you can check that out. If you get on my wait list, and you're not really going to wait long because it's Monday, but if you get on my wait list, so go to the bit.ly/atbehavior. And if you get on my wait list, I'm going to notify everybody on my wait list a day before, and they're going to get 60% off the course, which is crazy, and that'll happen for 48 hours. So if you're even remotely interested, get on the wait list because those people are going to get emailed and are going to get a coupon code. For those of you that are watching that are in my AT parenting community, that is my membership community that you pay monthly and you get weekly classes like this. You get that class for free. That gets uploaded right to our AT parenting community website, and you'll have access to that. So you do not need to purchase that. It is part of your membership. If you're interested in the AT parenting community, we would love to have you. It is growing into like this amazing, wonderful, loving group of parents. So supportive. And you can learn more at atparentingcommunity.com. I do weekly classes like this every single Friday. I do office hours in a private Facebook group separate from this Facebook group. They have access to worksheets and video lessons. And when I make my new classes, my mini classes, they get access to those classes for free. And they also get free one of my really big online classes. So my How to Parent Kids with OCD class, or How to Teach Kids to Crush Anxiety class. So if you are interested in that, you can check it out because I would get to know you a lot more because you would be in there and we would be talking in the forums on our website. So every month I will come in here and do a weekly class like I always have. So stay tuned next month on a different topic. And if you ever want to watch the replay of these, you can always go to the pinned classes at the very top of our group, or you can go to my YouTube channel. I have kids videos to help them with anxiety and OCD, and I do replays of my podcast and of my Facebook Live classes. So you can check that out. I think it's YouTube. Well, I know what it is. It's youtube.com/c/anxious-toddler78. It's not about toddlers. It's about everybody, but it's just the name. So let me see if I see any more questions. Oh, I got a couple more, so I'll just quickly answer these. Sandra said, my 8-year-old grandson with anxiety has a really hard time dealing with illness, injuries of any type, even if it is not him personally suffering from the illness or injury. How would you recommend handling it? A lot of kids are too empathetic, and so they really soak up other people's injuries or illnesses or difficult emotions. And sometimes if we can help channel that by, one, you can get him to visualize, and so visualize sending love. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but it can be very helpful to make them feel empowered. They can send them love or send them healing light. Also making cards or concrete things so they feel like they have a role that they can do. And then also letting know that people get better, hopefully some of the time, can help with that too. Lena said, how do you go on the wait list? I actually had a link for the wait list, and then it went away. I was doing a live for 2 seconds and then it went away. So if you go to the link, the bit.ly/AT behavior, at the very end of the page that explains the course, there's a link for the wait list. I'll also leave it here when I get off so that so you can come back and see it. Emma said, thank you for answering my question. Yes, my daughter is diagnosed with OCD, but I'm in the UK, and sadly there's very little help. Your podcast has been invaluable. Well, thank you. Yeah, when you said that, I was thinking that's a compulsion. And so I would approach that in the OCD sort of way, where I would be like, I'm not talking to your OCD, or tell your OCD, I'm sorry that it's bothering you. I would take that approach because that's more of a compulsion. And then you can also say, let's see how long you can go without asking that question, because when you make your OCD wait, you get stronger and your OCD gets smaller. So that's an approach too. Melinda said, hi, I'm so new here. Literally stumbled upon this a few minutes ago, so I'm popping in the middle of this. That's okay. Welcome, Melinda. So glad you found us. I have a hard time figuring out the difference between anxiety and OCD. I think my son has this repetitive behavior when it's bedtime, and I say, okay, kids, it's bedtime. And my son says, no, I need a drink, I need a snack, and runs to get a snack and drink. This is an every night thing for us, every night. Even after being told no, you've been told to get one 5 minutes ago, you didn't. Anyway, I don't even know if I'm making sense, but it's like he has a meltdown. If I tell him no, it's time for bed, let's go. It all resorts to raising my voice, and if I don't give him a snack, he's in bed telling me he's starving, his belly hurts. Anyway, like I said, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I want to bring it up to see if it was something specific. I'm not getting much help from doctors. Actually, I see that as really common. I don't know if I would call that OCD just based on what you're sharing, Melinda. To me, just in what you're describing, just in the things that you mentioned, it sounds very anxiety related to me. A lot of times kids will stall, especially around bedtime, and they become also very hypersensitive to like their sensory motor functioning. So that's when they're very aware of all their aches and pains. That's when they're very aware that they're starving and then they're thirsty. And so for some kids, it's a delay tactic, and not in a manipulative way, but in a survival sort of way. And other kids, they're becoming hyper-focused on their somatic complaints. And so one thing, my daughter is the exact same way, and she's 7. And so this is so sad, but literally she's got a water bottle next to her bed. She has a bag of crackers. Part of that is because she wakes up, she has celiac, and so she's also hungry a lot because I think there's an absorption issue. Who knows? But so she has a bag of crackers that's Ziplocked. Even though I don't allow food upstairs, she's allowed to have it in her room. And so all of the excuses, or whatever you want to call them, they're taken care of before she even gets into bed. So she's like, I'm thirsty, your water is right there. I'm hungry, your crackers are right there. So that's one approach that I take. And Melinda said, yes, you get so hyper-focused on things. Yeah, and I think maybe trying to explore and see if there is a common core fear underneath that besides being hungry, and see if he's stalling for some reason. You know, what's the worst part about bedtime? I would go into that and teach him, because you really want to get to the core fear. Okay. So does anyone else have any other questions before I wrap up? And if you have any ideas for topics for next time, you can leave them in here too. I love to talk about things that are directly related to the things that you want to hear about. I am quietly in this group. We have amazing admins that do a fantastic job keeping this group supportive and loving, and so I want to give a shout out to all of them. I really appreciate that. Melinda said, "Oh my gosh, your daughter sounds like my son." He does that too. I know, when you described your son, I was like, that's my daughter. They all sound kind of similar when it comes to anxiety. So so leave a comment if you have a topic for next time. I will post a thread probably in a little while about topic ideas. And then Melinda, welcome to our group. You'll find that this, even though we're a large group, we're over 10,000 parents, which is pretty crazy. They're compassionate, kind-hearted, supportive people. So you guys are all amazing, and I just want to thank you for being supportive to each other. Like, the love that's in this group is phenomenal. So I will be back next month. If you're interested, check out my behavior class, and if you're interested in joining my community, it's a closer knit community than this one, then join the AT Parenting community. We would love to have you. We get to know each other a lot better over there because we're not 10,000 people. So have a fantastic day, and I will talk to you again next month. Bye.